No matter what, there will always be comparisons made between Borderlands 2 and 3. Oftentimes, these comparisons are in favor of Borderlands 2 and essentially hating on Borderlands 3. But that's not what this video is. Hey everyone, I'm Constant Canadian, and this is 5 things Borderlands 3 did better than Borderlands 2. As I said at the end of the last video, I love both of these games, but just for different reasons. They both do some things better than the other, and of course, do some things worse than the other too. But I'm curious as to what your thoughts are. Let me know what you think Borderlands 3 did better or worse than Borderlands 2. Just please try to keep it civil. The first thing on this list is actually more like the first 50 things on the list, but it is the insane amount of quality of life changes. For anyone who doesn't know, quality of life changes are basically any changes that just make the game generally easier and more fun to play, and Borderlands 3 was absolutely filled with these kinds of changes. Just to name a few, being able to buy all ammo from the ammo vendor with one button, being able to fast travel from anywhere in the entire galaxy, being able to ping in multiplayer matches when you don't have a mic, better sorting of the inventory, way bigger cross-character inventory, and so many more small little changes like this that make playing Borderlands 3 feel just that much better than playing Borderlands 2. It is undeniable that these features are an improvement over Borderlands 2. Go back to Borderlands 2 and I can guarantee that you will want to fast travel from anywhere, or be forgetting that you can't buy all ammo. In fact, a lot of these features are so helpful that modders actually made mods to add them into Borderlands 2 for people who don't like to play Borderlands 3. And honestly, I just don't think Borderlands 3 would ever be the same without a lot of these awesome features. Something else that Borderlands 3 did way better than any other Borderlands game is the overall feel of combat and just general movement. Borderlands 3's combat feels way better than any other games in the series. Just basic features like hit markers and melee attacks staggering enemies make a world of a difference in this game. In Borderlands 3 on the other hand, combat felt very dull. I mean sure, there were still the Borderlands mechanics like elemental types and various action skills, but aside from that, there wasn't much. Combat in Borderlands 2 felt like a very basic FPS game, just point and shoot, and it seems like Gearbox took combat far more seriously in Borderlands 3 than they did in Borderlands 2. And that's not even to mention the changes that were made to movement as well. No longer is the only movement option walk, run, and jump. No longer do you need to learn how to grenade jump just to get over a wall that is the same height as your character. Now we have mantling and sliding, which makes for much smoother feeling gameplay than in Borderlands 2. Altogether, it seems like Gearbox really focused on getting the gameplay in Borderlands 3 feeling super smooth and fluid, and it really shows. Another huge advantage in Borderlands 3's favor is the weapon and build variety, not only throughout the game, but also at Endgame too. In Borderlands 2, there were not a lot of options if you wanted to survive and deal damage at Endgame. A ruby/grog nozzle, and then your choice of the 5 or so guns that were actually capable of doing damage come OP10. And that's not even to mention the build variety, or lack thereof. Most of the characters in Borderlands 2 only had 2 or 3 useful builds come endgame. In Borderlands 3, however, this is just not the case. While yes, the endgame is still challenging in Borderlands 3, and while it does unfortunately make certain guns completely obsolete, the severity of this effect is much lower. Over 70% of the guns in Borderlands 3 are usable at endgame, allowing for a lot more variety from playthrough to playthrough, and despite the fact that Borderlands 3 has 50% less Vault Hunters than Borderlands 2, there is still significantly more build variety. Although of course this hasn't always been the case. Throughout 2021, Gearbox went absolutely crazy buffing skills and weapons to make them perform on about the same level as the rest of the gear, and that is what really made the difference from Borderlands 2's gear versus Borderlands 3's gear. Something that Borderlands 3 definitely did better than Borderlands 2 was the post-launch support and events. Now this is a pretty big area, so I'll try to keep it short, but Borderlands 3's DLCs were by far the best throughout all of the franchise. Don't get me wrong, previous Borderlands games have had some good DLCs like the Attack on Dragon Keep, Claptastic Voyage, Captain Scarlet's Pirate Booty, and even General Knox's Armory. However, a lot of the DLCs, especially for Borderlands 2, fell kind of flat for me. That's not to say they weren't fun, I mean extra content is extra content, but if you compare Borderlands 2's DLC to Borderlands 3's DLCs, then it's a complete blowout. Every single DLC that Borderlands 3 has gotten has just been incredible. A masterpiece of storytelling, if you will. On top of all of this, Gearbox still finds time to set up in-game events and release occasional hotfixes. I guess we will have to see what happens to this game's post-launch support when Wonderlands comes out, although sadly it seems like post-launch support has already started slowing down for Borderlands 3. This next point is not really a huge game changer for me personally, but I definitely feel that it's worth mentioning since for some people it can make or break the enjoyment of a game. That thing is of course the graphics. Now obviously Borderlands 3 is going to look more detailed and crisp given the fact that it came out 7 years after Borderlands 2. But I think Gearbox did an amazing job with modernizing the graphics while still keeping that Borderlands feel to the game. I know that there are some people out there that say they don't like the graphics of Borderlands 3 because they don't look very Borderlands-y, but honestly, I think that those people were just looking for something to not like about Borderlands 3. And finally, probably by far the biggest thing that Borderlands 3 did better than Borderlands 2 is the way that Endgame worked. I know I'm not alone in this, but I really did not like the way that Borderlands 2's Endgame worked. It never made any sense to me. The overpowered levels were just absolutely crazy, and it never made sense to me that in order to unlock the hardest difficulty, you had to beat quite possibly one of the hardest pieces of content in the game. DigiPeak was honestly one of the toughest pieces of content in Borderlands 2, and once you beat it, congratulations, you get to play it again, except harder. Another issue with OP levels is that you didn't get rewarded for it other than the previously mentioned harder difficulty. There wasn't any gear that only dropped on certain OP levels, there wasn't an increased chance of legendary loot, and the only difference that OP levels made was the difficulty and the fact that you could get pearlescents, which weren't even really worth it. This all became even more confusing with the launch of DLC 5, where level 80 was now the max and you could get pearlescent gear without ever even touching the peak, which made OP levels completely pointless for anything other than making the game harder. Compare that to the Mayhem levels from Borderlands 3, which, while they aren't perfect, are still far better than the overpowered levels, and the difference is night and day. This honestly is the biggest change between the two games. Not having to struggle through 24 plus torturous hours of DigiPeak just to get to the hardest difficulty is so much more fun to me. Plus with Mayhem mode, you get rewarded as you move further and further up. The higher up you go, the better loot gets, and some of the best gear is even locked behind harder difficulties, which makes so much more sense to me. While neither Borderlands 2's or Borderlands 3's endgame mechanics are really what I would love to see, Borderlands 3's endgame is a lot more enjoyable and a lot less irritating to get through. Anyway, that's gonna wrap up this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see all of you in the next one.